Hello and welcome to the Digital Assets Report. I'm Jane King at the New York Stock Exchange, and with me today, Akin Sawyerr, the Managing Director of Fellman Limited.
Good morning.
And also Vincent Molinari, CEO of Temple Markets.
Hey, Jane.
Welcome.
Great to have you back.
Yes, great to be back. So, Akin, let's start with you. I know you've been doing some work in the blockchain area with Fellman, so kind of give us a sense, set us up, what kind of work you've been doing, and then we'll go a little deeper into what you're working on.
Sure. So I started most of my career off in management consulting, and over the last 7 years, I've been focused primarily on fintech in Africa. So I started off with an investment I made in a mobile payments company called Splash Mobile Money. And over the last 7 years, we've seen sort of how fintech has evolved across the continent. And we're now sort of shifting to looking at remittances, which oftentimes for the unbanked represents over half of their income comes from abroad. And sub-Saharan Africa is still the most expensive corridor in the world to transfer money into.
Interesting.
So we're trying to leverage blockchain to sort of solve that problem of high costs and also make it faster for people to get money.
Okay, so you mentioned the cost in sub-Saharan Africa of banking. So kind of describe for us what the situation is like there for fintech compared to the rest of the world.
Sure. So when you're thinking about remittances going into Africa, the challenge oftentimes is you have two large incumbent players, Western Union, MoneyGram, or the banks. So you don't have many channels, and particularly for the unbanked, you tend to have to work through third-party agents, right? So if I get cash, I have to go through, there are many more steps for the unbanked to actually get money. And so you have a lot of middlemen that are extracting value across the chain.
They're taking their fees all along the way.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's part of the infrastructure challenge, right? But with blockchain, you could essentially, migrate to a peer-to-peer system where whoever is actually transferring the money can transfer money directly to the recipient, right? Leveraging mobile platforms, which have been proliferating across Africa the last 15 years.
So that could be revolutionary for Africa.
Yes,
really.
I believe so.
That could be. Vince, what are your thoughts on this? I know that you study this industry. We've talked before about how this could change things globally and really just make the world that much smaller.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of powerful things. I'd love to get more of Akin's insight firsthand on it. I've been involved with the Initiative for Global Development for a number of years, working on various initiatives on the continent, and it just happens to be this week is Africa Investment Rising roadshow for IGD here in New York City, so props to them. I think what's really important is Africa as the continent represents such wonderful investment opportunities that we continue to look at, but I think maybe some of the undertold narrative is the brain trust and the true talents that are within the African population that are now being leveraged and being able to be utilized because of access, because of closing the digital divide and things like blockchain. So I think it is truly transformative, and I'd love to hear from Akin. I've heard statistics of close to 50% of the population is under 18 or 21 years old, and if you add the female population to that, is maybe 60% of the entire population of the continent. So those are tremendously powerful engines of growth, and when you overlay that with technology, I think it really can be transformational.
Is that what you're seeing there, Akin?
Yeah, I'm totally agreeing with that. I think we have the youngest population in the world, where a lot of advanced economies are actually depopulating, right? So they're having less children, and so it presents a really large opportunity. I think part of the challenge to that regard is, what are these people going to be doing, right? I think a lot of the African economies haven't really thought through a long-term strategy to absorb all these young people that are coming into the workforce. So I think there's a big opportunity leverage in blockchain for people to have the skills, the talents to work locally, or to remain local but work globally, right? Because with tech, you can work in a distributed fashion, right? You're judged by the quality of your work. So I think there's a huge potential around just educating this young talent to be able to work globally and work on globally relevant problems and solutions.
Now, I know you mentioned, we talked a little bit before the interview about education and how that's another thing, kind of a side thing that has to happen for this to really work, is for the population has to be educated on, I guess, how to code and technology and all that. So where does that stand?
Yeah, so I think that's really, if I have to be honest, I think that should be the primary focus for countries, for businesses. Because if you don't have the talent, you're not going to build anything. If you look across many African countries, there's still the same challenge also of a young population, not enough higher educational options. So you tend to have a lot of intelligent people that can't get into schools. I mean, some of the universities in Nigeria, for example, have much lower acceptance rates than top schools internationally, just because you have so many applicants. Okay. So I think there's a big opportunity to absorb this workforce, frankly, into more relevant, future-focused work. Wow. I think the other challenge you face with educational institutions is they're built for a previous generation, right? A generation where you got a job, you stayed in that job, you have to be very competent at that one thing, and you can have a career for 40, 50 years doing the same thing. The economy we're going to globally now is fast-paced, change happens quickly, and it's more sort of project-based work, right? You have a lot of individuals that are freelancers. So I think we need to also, essentially leverage this opportunity to shift educational options for young Africans to work that's, more relevant for today.
Yeah. And then also supply chain management is another area that you're working on, also related to blockchain in Africa. Tell me about that. Yeah, so supply chain is, if you think about, the largest industries in the world, it's commodity industries. And historically in Africa, it's been a commodity play, right? Goods being taken out. The challenge that's always been existent is issues around identity, right? Where are we sourcing those products from? Who are the producers? And then the whole path through the supply chain. And as you look at even, international multinationals, they're getting more and more concerned about making sure their products are sourced from, non-conflict areas and so I think blockchain has this wonderful opportunity to solve a number of problems, around identity, around visibility in the supply chain on both ends. So I, as a producer, want to know what my options are in terms of markets to sell into. Right? What can I get the most value for my product? On the other hand, too, off-takers and buyers internationally want to be able to tell their stakeholders that we know the source of all the products we're getting, it's been vetted, we have visibility into how much people are being paid. So I think, supply chain is a big, massive industry, right? It's about how things move. And blockchain can do a lot to just make it a lot easier to identify product sourcing and then also invest into the supply chain, right? Once I have a sense of where products are coming from, what the returns look like, then investors can now come in on the back of that data and invest into those systems. Well, that's what I was going to ask. So Vince, you answered first and then Akin second. I know a lot of our viewers are investors. They're interested in kind of getting involved in this space. How can somebody take advantage of the huge potential that could happen in Africa?
Well, yeah, I think to touch a little bit on what Akin started with, I think we're seeing a clear path to transparency, and that transparency is being facilitated through the blockchain. So when you have stakeholders that are becoming consumers and stakeholders in organizations which they trust, whether that's source of product from ensuring it's not sourced from conflict zones, child labor, managing deforestation.
So you'll be able to check all that and make sure
absolutely.
That there's not...
and that is creating brand loyalty for organizations that are adhering to those, and when you can see that on the blockchain, which are driving their valuations and access to capital. So I think that's the beginning of how this all ties together and the rewards, if you would, for organizations who adhere to transparency.
Yeah. What do you think? We talked about how fast this is moving. What kind of is your timeline for 5 years? Do you think you'll be able to see, really kind of full-fledged blockchain in sub-Saharan Africa?
I think so. I'm actually bullish on the adoption rate in Africa being actually faster.
Okay.
Because when you look at, there are not a lot of legacy industries to compete with, right? Look at identity management. In most countries across Africa, you can't actually identify citizens. People don't have social security numbers, right? So blockchain could be a way to onboard all these people into a platform and a system where the identity is not only clear, but it's portable, right? So if I have a credit history, for example, operating in an African country, that should be able to transfer if I travel out or immigrate. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to sort of go into industries that haven't really been well developed and just start with blockchain, right? Okay. Everything across from even, for example, there was an election in Sierra Leone, and the blockchain that was the first election I know of in the world where blockchain was used to actually record and transmit votes. So there are lots
really kind of just starting on the ground and...
Exactly. So I think it's a greenfield, right? I think there are lots of interesting industries that really have never been optimized. And I think for those who have the wherewithal, there's a huge opportunity on the continent.
Really interesting. Okay, thank you so much, Akin, for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Also, Vince, as always.
My pleasure.
And thank you as well for joining us on the Digital Assets Report. I'm Jane King at the New York Stock Exchange.